We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to take the law, we enforce it. But at the end of the day, each and every member should go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer, the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. I'm your host, Dave Bourne, and it is March 16th, 2016, and I'm coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada. Thank you for tuning in to Nonpartisan Liberty for All. We are on weeknights, Tuesday through Thursday, 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern, and you can listen live on Spreaker.com as well as nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. And to the archives on Spreaker, YouTube, Twitter, SoundCloud, and a few other applications that you can get from nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. And those are posted immediately after the live show airs. Here on Nonpartisan Liberty for All, we promote the ideas of true freedom and liberty, meaning being able to do whatever you want as long as you respect the freedom of others and don't directly interfere with their freedom, as well as exposing government for what it is, a mafia based on extortion that rules without consent by threat of force and violence. Today is our week that we have historian and our expert on the economy and geopolitics, Ken Schortgen of the Daily Economist. Definitely go check out his site. There are a number of articles that we're going to talk about today that I suggest you check out. We're going to get to Ken in a few minutes, but before we do that, yesterday I had talked about an article regarding the FBI and declassified documents. And it's funny because today we'll also be talking about some other declassified documents that Ken has written about relating to the financial crisis. But within the documents I talked about yesterday had to do with now, I think they were from originally 2014, but they had just released them, and they had to do with schools now being instructed by the FBI to spy on kids, which pretty much Common Core is part of that, but more specifically to spy on kids that are quote-unquote anti-government, sovereign citizens. Essentially, if you're considered anti-government or you speak out against the government or anything like that, they would call you a sovereign citizen, which, as I mentioned yesterday, is an oxymoron, because to be sovereign is to be free, essentially, and your own free sovereign person. Yeah, I know you're not supposed to use the definition of the word, or you're not supposed to use the word in the definition, but in a citizen, by definition, is you're a citizen of a nation, meaning you're a subject or a part of a nation under a government. So it doesn't make sense anyway. I believe the FBI had essentially made that term up. I remember first reading it on their website. But anyway, we see all this increase in getting citizens, I hate the word citizens, so getting people, because I never asked to be a citizen. I was just born in a geographical area, and then, hey, you're a citizen of the United States. And I know most people would say, oh, you should be so happy that you are, and all of this shit and whatever. It's the greatest country in the world. And I don't know about that. There are a lot of countries I'm glad I was not born in, and I'm not saying that I'm not grateful for the things I have, but there are a lot of other countries that do have a high standard of living and the United States is not necessarily the greatest country in the world. It's definitely heading towards one of the most oppressive. And one of the things they're doing is, of course, spying war on people, whether it's via phone, computer, whatever, your neighbors. And the funny thing is, they put on these commercials as well, even at the movies, see something, say something. And the way they actually put them together, it was like, this is our community. If we see anything, bad, like the way they structure it is just insane. Anyway, so yesterday, my fiance found on her car a note. It looked like it was written by a fucking third grader or somebody retarded. If you had seen I should actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a fucking picture of it and put it on Facebook. So I'm going to put it on the Nonpartisan Liberty for All Facebook page. And so you can see the fucking writing. But we keep the dog outside when we're not home during the day. The past couple weeks, it's been hot, but it hasn't been hot enough where we actually started putting the cat outside too we have a second floor where there's no way the cat can jump off it. And it's not open. I mean, it's open, but it has a top over it. So basically the cat is, yes, if it was actually 100 degrees, which they tried to claim in their note, then that's a little different. But what they did was they made a threat and said, we left our pets out without food or water in 100-degree weather, and that they threatened to call the ASPCA and the Homeowners Association. And first of all, there was food and water out there. And how the fuck do they know when we feed the animals anyway? Because you don't have to leave food out all fucking day. If you feed like the dog, we will feed twice a day. So if we're going to feed them in the morning and then after work, we're not going to leave food out so the dog can just fucking eat all day. Water, yes. And there's always been water. Now, they sometimes dump it over. How they would know that, they would either have to be staring at our fucking house and really watching it closely and looking closely at it, at least for the cat in the front that's on the second floor there. Now, the dog was in the back. The only way to see anything, unless you jump over the walls are pretty high, so you'd have to be pretty tall, and you still couldn't tell if there was water in this bowl. Sometimes I'm 2 feet away from it and I can't tell. I have to actually like shake it. I'm like, okay, to make sure there's water. But they were in our fucking yard before, which is trespassing. If I would have found them, I would have pulled out a fucking gun and told them to get the fuck out. So you have people even coming in because you have to open a gate. It's a locked, it's not locked, but it might as well be. It's hard to open it. You have to open up the gate and then go into this back area that is totally walled off. So my point being is, I think about having kids, and this is a type of thing that happens to people, and they get their kids taken away because you have neighbors that are watching everything you do because they have no fucking life, or they feel that it's their responsibility to save the world or some shit. And they don't even know what the real story is. And they didn't put their name on it neither, because I would have went right to their fucking house and said something to them. But they wrote an anonymous letter and retarded fucking, I don't know what it is. It's English, but it's like retarded fucking printed blocks and shit like that. So you have people making assumptions and then making threats and not even saying who the fuck they are. So I was going to go door to door. I think I know who it is. I think it's got to be the people right next door. But to be sitting there watching what people are doing and thinking that, oh, you're helping, or, you know, if you're concerned, maybe come to the door and come talk to me and ask and say, well, it looked like they didn't have any water. We're concerned about your pets. Now, that's none of your fucking business neither. Okay? Our animals are fine. They're taken care of. It's not like the animals look like they're unhappy or malnourished or whatever. I know my cat will meow just because it sees people and it wants to be around people. That's the type of cat I have. So maybe the cat was meowing or something like that. The dog is just friendly and will run up to people and want them to pet her. But this whole bullshit that you're sitting there watching my backyard and watching my fucking house and then making these anonymous threats is fucked up. And you can just look at that and see how it would apply to something else, whether it's your kids or, you know, and that's what happens all the time too. You get, you know, the ASPCA can't do shit. So I'm nervous about leaving the animals outside because if they kidnap my animals, and, you know, of course, the government does whatever the fuck they want, so they'll probably just defend them. But as far as if I'm home, I'll put them outside if I fucking want to, because as long as it's not, you know, too hot and I know they're taken care of and they have water and they're fed and, you know, it's none of their fucking business. So it's just another one of those things where, okay, well, I just have pets and I'm being threatened by people who don't know shit about what's going on. What about when I have kids? What if the kids are playing outside and they feel that, oh, they're too young to be outside by themselves? And this has happened already where kids have been arrested, parents have been arrested. And unfortunately, I rent my house, but it's about 5 feet away from the next house. They are really close. But still, I wouldn't even know if somebody had a fucking cat on their balcony, because I'm not paying attention to what other people are doing. I'm only paying attention in a sense of not that I'm paranoid, but, you know, I'm always aware of my environment. And if somebody were, you know, especially with my show, you know, were to do something or something like that. So I'm aware of people if they get too close to me. That's about it. As far as houses that are right next to me or across the street, I don't really give a fuck what they're doing as long as they're not doing anything to threaten me. But I'm not paying attention to their kids or their fucking animals. But this is the type of thinking that is a serious issue, where people can't mind their fucking business and they want to be involved in everybody else's, and they feel that they have a right to somehow be involved in your life. And I don't want these fucking people involved in my life. That's why I want to move to the fucking desert. Unfortunately, my fiance doesn't want to move there, and have a house that is like a mile away from fucking the next house. I'm not even kidding. I'm totally serious, because this shit is just gonna get crazier and crazier. And of course, we got helicopters flying over the house at least once a day. I'm not saying they're flying over my house that it has anything to do with me. They're just patrolling the neighborhood. It's police helicopters or some kind of fucking agency. So I got a lot to talk about with Ken, so I don't want to keep him on hold anymore. If you'd like to call in, the number is 702. I forgot the fucking number again because I haven't done the show in a while. So let me just get that. While I'm getting that number, you can always Skype in at Nonpartisan Liberty for All. Just send a contact request and let us know what you want to talk about and where you're calling from. Or you can call via phone at 702-470-7664. I never call that number, and I forgot it last night too, but 702-470-7664. So now that we got through all of that, I'd like to welcome Ken back to the show. Obviously, he hasn't been on for a while because I haven't been on for a while. So, Ken, thanks as always for joining us.
Pleasure to be here, Dave. And hopefully your pet zoo fiasco will work itself out.
Yeah, do you believe that shit? And they don't even have the fucking balls to actually write their name or their number of their house. They're just anonymously, we're going to call the ASPCA. But
over here in Arizona, just about every house is now in a HOA. And
it's like that here, too.
What ends up happening is that the people who report in a given housing area, they don't actually live there. What usually happens is you got like an elderly couple or, who just spend all day getting upset because you have one weed growing when it's spring. And what they'll do is they'll tell their friends who live in another housing area right nearby to drive by and make an anonymous call. So nobody can go chase them down in the the actual people down.
Yeah, that I think
they
happened in another instance where we put because one of the dog could fit through the gate, so we bought like a baby gate, and somebody reported that. Those people, I think, did that, but these people I know because they were even saying, you're annoying your neighbors, and from the way the letter read, I'm pretty sure that it's the people next door. I could be wrong, but it sounded like the way the letter was written, that it was written from somebody that was right there, and that they had to be watching for a while. So I know what you're saying, and I think that did happen before, where they actually have, not even that, but they have people that walk around that the HOA hires just to fucking look at shit. But this was something that was ongoing because before we had, like I mentioned, my fiance caught people in the fucking yard, and you got to open the gate. And I find people in my yard, they're going to get a fucking gun pulled on them. I'm not going to shoot anybody unless I get attacked.
What you can also do is if it continues to be a hassle, you can get some GoPro cameras, put them in the thing, and then they activate on motion. And so if the HOA or whoever comes after you with a letter, you can just say, here's a film. Either you're going to tell me who this is, you're going to reprimand them to keep quiet, or you're going to get a lawsuit. My lawyer will speak to you.
Right.
That's usually the best way to do it. You can scare HOAs because, HOAs are like politicians. The nerd who wanted to be class president,
right.
He gets a little power as the HOA president, and he takes it out on everybody.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is just that these people are, fucking cowards, and they're sitting there
collecting their welfare, nothing else to do. They
must be. So, I don't even think it violates the HOA rules, actually. They just, they're trying to make threats because they mentioned the ASPCA. But what the ASPCA made me think of is the scenarios where you have people doing this. They're calling child protective services on people because their 8-year-old is outside at 6 o'clock by themselves or something, and they feel that that's not appropriate. So it's kind of in the same vein, and that's why I brought it up, because to me it goes beyond that. This is not like just like a little HOA violation where you have the people that are checking for it. This is somebody who's like, you're abusing your animals in our opinion, and they don't know fucking anything. They can't tell that, they claim it's 100 degrees, it's 75 degrees out, and there was also a roof over it, so the cat was fine, and the cat had plenty of food and water. I don't want to sit and harp on this, but yeah, so it's all, to me, I put it in that same category with those fucking people that call the Child Protective Services and call the police on people for letting their kids go outside and play. So it's getting ridiculous. But since we haven't had you on in a while, since I haven't been on, what I wanted to do first, and there's a lot of stuff, current stuff to talk about, but just in summary, what's anything that's been going on in the past, 3-4 weeks?
Well, the start of the year, obviously, we had the stock markets just go absolutely insane. We entered a bear market, 20% down. We actually had the last 2 days of December, trading days of December, the first 7 days of January, and then 17 out of the first 19 days of January were all negative in pretty much all the markets. And then it declined from its highs, it declined more than 20%, so that's considered a bear market. Since then, there's been a lot of interventions by Bank of Japan, by the ESF, the Europe, of course, and they brought the markets back about 8%, so the dead cat bounced. But interestingly enough, the analysts who usually cheerlead and say everything's fine, like JP Morgan, Bank of America, and a few others, they've actually been telling their clients to sell into these rallies. They don't believe that these recent rallies are what they seem, so they're selling into it. And a new report came out earlier this week that nearly all of the recovery, the 8% recovery from the January swoon, has been corporations buying back their own stocks at cheap prices.
And that's what they've been doing for years now, right? For the past 5 years.
Yeah, they've been doing it, and what's gotten them in trouble, of course, is that they've been borrowing money to buy back their stock. See, when it comes to earnings, right now, all the CEOs and the boards care about is P&E ratios and EPS. P&E is price per earnings, and EPS is earnings per share. So when both the revenue and the earnings per share come out every quarter when they report them, if you have less earnings, the way you've got to show growth, of course, is to have less stock available. So they'll do buybacks. They're not actually growing anything. Their production, is less. They're making less money, so they've got to make their share pool smaller, so they can say, "Oh, look, our revenues were up and our EPS was up." Da 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 da.
So you're saying they're buying it back and taking it out of commission, basically?
Yeah. When the company buys it back, it takes it out of what's called the float.
Right. So but does it still exist as stock, or they just totally they buy it back and eliminate that stock? So if they bought 100 shares, that they would, instead of holding on to that as owning more shares, the company, as opposed to having outstanding shares, would they just basically retire those shares?
No, they wouldn't retire it. They would just unregister it, so it's not tradable. When a company goes IPO, goes public, okay, they issue a certain amount of stock,
right?
And that's in the initial. They may or may not sell all of it. As a matter of fact, a lot of times, probably the first 20 to 30 to 40%, well, even more than that, say the next 60 to 65%, are distributed amongst the owners, especially if it's a private company like, say, Facebook, then goes public. The owner will get at least 51%.
Right, so they controlling interest.
Bingo. And then, say, 20% is divided amongst the venture capitalists who funded it while it was still a private company. And then, of course, some of the other founders. In the case of Facebook, you had Zuckerberg get 60% of the stock, and the Winklehoff twins or whatever, who really built Facebook before Zuckerberg stole the idea from them, they get about $10 billion worth of stock, just to make sure, in a lawsuit they got that. So anyway, what remains, say there's 30% of issued stock, that's called the float, and that is what is publicly traded.
Right.
Now, when they do their initial, now that's what an IPO is, initial public offering. Right. You can always later do a secondary offering if you need more shares out there.
Yeah, you can issue more stock. Like, it would dilute the stock.
Correct.
But
you do that if you do a stock split. Say you've got 100 million shares out there, and you're Apple, and all of a sudden your stock is going so high that you're getting less and less buyers because they can't afford to buy it. But you have a bunch of people who want to get into it. So then you would split your stock so that everybody who owns stock gets double the shares. The price halves, which is normal, and then the float is bigger, and then there's much more trading and more people can get in. Same way you can do it with a stock buyback is if there's too much stock out there and there's really not a lot of volume in trading, the way that you boost the price is by having the company take its own revenues and go out and buy the stock back. It's still able to be set out in the float if it wants to, but it'd be unregistered from the float, so it's not tradable, and they could always reissue it at another time. So that's what's been going on.
Does it not count as this is the one part I don't understand. Everything else I do, but so is it different than? So say like the majority stockholder, owns 51%, and then they buy back, the company buys back that stock. It doesn't count the same way that the stock that the company or the board of directors own or anything like that. It kind of just sits there.
Those are individual shareholders.
Right.
Zuckerberg would be an individual shareholder. If the company buys back stock, it's the corporation, and they have their own little pocket pool that has nothing to do with what the individual shareholders have.
And that doesn't count as total stock because it's not tradable at that time.
It would be considered outstanding shares, but it'd be unregistered. But for reporting purposes, they would only do what's held by individuals and the float.
So that's how it benefits them there when they don't have to report that. So when they're dividing the revenue by the outstanding shares or the net income, then obviously it's going to look better for them.
Correct. So that's what's really been going on this latest ever since about the 20th of February. We've seen the move up, and it's recovered. But today really, when Janet Yellen came out, and this is something we talked about going into last year. I think it was in September, October we had talked, and I think I said flat out, they will not raise rates.
Right, and they did by what, a quarter of a point?
No, they didn't in September, but in December I came back and I said this caveat. I said they shouldn't raise rates. But I believe they will raise rates because of credibility. Because for the entire year they've been talking about it's time to raise rates, time to raise rates.
Well, they've been talking about it for a couple of years, haven't they?
October of 2014. So when you get from October 2014 to December 2015, we're talking what?
A year.
Year and a month or so.
A couple months, yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty close to a year.
But it was only a quarter of a point at that time,
right?
Where you were saying that they shouldn't raise it at all. That it's going to be a mess if they raise it, and they did anyway. But they met? Was it today that they met and decided that, or yesterday?
They met today, and I'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
Here's there's a misnomer with the December rate hike that the markets proved, but the point is that they did it in December. And they shouldn't have, because here's how it works. When there's inflation, when prices are rising too fast, you want to raise interest rates. You want to raise the cost of borrowing so that fewer and fewer people can afford to borrow. And it slows down the economy, it slows down prices, and slows down inflation. This is what Paul Volcker did in the stagflation of the 1970s when he came on as the Fed chairman under Reagan. He jacked interest rates up to 21% in one fell swoop.
Jesus.
So that all of this inflation and artificial, but then again, all that artificial borrowing that was being done was in part what led to gold going to $840 and silver going to $50 an ounce. Okay, so asset prices were in massive inflation, but stagflation is when the economy is in stagnation. There's no production, no growth, no jobs, but all prices are going up. So who can afford to buy anything if your wages aren't going up and there are no jobs? So that's a catch-22 for the thing. So in an inflationary economy,
Well, it still
you wanna
feels like
raise
we're
rates.
in that now where there's not a lot of jobs. Prices seem to be going up. At least, you know, when I'm looking at things like internet and utilities like cable and DirecTV and all of these things, I see a lot of these things going up, as well as prices at the, you know, grocery stores.
Well, you're right, but the central bank doesn't care about discretionary. What is it? There's core inflation, and then there's
There's things
PMI.
that you don't need. Right.
The things like gasoline, rents, food, they took that out in the 1990s. Clinton did, because he didn't want inflation the actual cost of inflation showing up on his reports. So ever since the 1980s, they've been fudging with the actual data models, and that's how you can get Now think about this: we have 4.9% unemployment, but
Which
we
is
have 94
bullshit.
million Americans in the labor force who don't have a job.
Right, because
they're
it's how
not
they
counted.
Right, because it's how they're not counting the people. They're saying, well, these people aren't looking anymore, so we don't count them.
Correct.
It's the way they put together their model is
to make
it's bullshit.
politicians look good. But here's the problem. Okay, the central bank has decided that they trust the politicians' data. They trust the BEA, the Bureau of Economic.
Well, they say that, but
I'm
trust, sure they know it's bullshit too.
Exactly.
Right.
You know, they have hundreds of economists that are all Ivy League PhDs. Now, either they're all Keynesian whack jobs, or they're doing this on purpose. And I'm a believer that they're doing this on purpose.
Yeah, definitely.
We'll get to that. Anyway, you raise interest rates when inflation is in the economy. You lower interest rates when deflation, okay? Because if deflation, that means prices are dropping so fast, there are no buyers. You want to make cheap money out there so that people will borrow at low things and buy assets. And that usually they think, because we are in a Keynesian credit based economy, they think that people will go ahead and buy stuff.
Well, really, I mean, they should leave everything alone, not have a Federal Reserve, and let the markets fucking run how they run. But
that's the problem is, and it goes back to the discussions you and I have had in the past. You would have to make every human a robot for them not to seek power, wealth, and
right. It's not gonna happen. That's the whole reason why I'm against government, because no matter what, these people are going to seek power. And
even if there was no government, there would still be those who seek power. You know, you look in the Dark Ages after Rome fell, there were no governments, but the entirety of the landscape of all those lands were run by warlords. And there was constant war for the next 700 years as men sought power. They didn't have to have a formalized government. Man seeks power and dominion over his fellow man.
True, but they also didn't have the technology that we have now.
No, but your lifespan, because of that, your lifespan was between 25 and 30 years old. So, that's here nor there. But the point is that right now what we're seeing, and I'm going to tie it quick, and we're going to talk a little politics at the very end, but I'm going to tie it into it right now. The whole thing between the Democrats, the Republicans, the Federal Reserve, Wall Street, corporations, it's one big fascist oligarchy. Okay, so what is the greatest thing that the powers that be want to do? They want to create scapegoats. Okay, so everybody's going to say Janet Yellen's an idiot, so everybody focuses on Janet Yellen. Well, Janet Yellen's not making the calls here. She's just the person they put in front of the microphone. She's an absolute flat out idiot. Okay,
she's the figurehead. She's the puppet. Let me tell you something. You know, the same thing with.
I want to take that back. She's not an idiot. Before she was in that power as the Fed chairman, going back about a decade, she actually spoke out against things like quantitative easing and low interest rates.
Yeah, but it didn't.
But she wasn't in a position to tell Greenspan to do it.
Yeah, didn't he? He did the same fucking thing too. Greenspan was all about gold, like before he, years ago, wasn't he? Didn't he write some paper, or he was totally the opposite of how he was when he got involved with the Fed.
The reason is because he was given a choice, and it wasn't a threat choice, but he was given a choice. You can find yourself in the elite if you do this. And you know what? He
sold out.
What he did was he was the one who started the creation of the electronic trading systems. I don't know if he was the coder, but he was very good at algorithms. So he did that, and that's when you remember back in the old days when you watch those old movies that stocks were in eighths. Like a stock would be 5 1/8, 5 1/4, but it was because of Greenspan and the electronic system that we went to the decimal. To the stock is now $19.70, 1971, 1972, instead of 1/8, 1/4, 1/2.
Oh yeah,
like
I never. That's before
if you ever look
my
at
time,
some of those old movies and they got one of those little ticker tape machines, whatever, everything will be in eighths. Okay, so you had Greenspan who adopted that, and what that started doing was it helped remove stock certificates. Okay, back in the day when you bought a stock through your broker, the clearinghouse would have 3 days to accept the trade, get the money for the trade, and send your broker a stock certificate you got to keep. By going to an electronic system, what they did was they helped eliminate the 3-day clearing period, but it also meant that they didn't have to distribute stock certificates. It also did a number of two things. One of those is that back in the day, if you wanted to short a stock, you could actually do it by going to the broker and borrowing somebody else's stock that they owned. But when you did that, you had to pay a percentage. You paid them interest for borrowing their stock to short the market. Today, you don't have to do that. They can short the heck out of it for whatever the float is, but they can also short with naked shorts. So, the whole thing, because of Greenspan, absolutely changed in the scheme of things. And from there, we ended up having a completely electronic market. We have high frequency trading algorithms that make that. You wonder why the stock market is going up. They have rigged the system so much. Get this. The high-frequency trading computers are built on algorithms that look for certain keywords in the news cycle. This is why when the Fed chairwoman comes out and says, "I'm raising interest rates," instantly. I mean, you and I as humans.
It looks for those. It finds those keywords raising raising interest rates.
We don't sit there waiting for the Fed chairman to report something with our finger over the keyboard and a trade already done and get out there. Because if you take a look at the stock market, or you take a look at the currency markets, or you take a look at any of these things, you will see that they will go straight up 100 points in like 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay, that is not a bunch of traders sitting there ready to make a trade the second they hear a word. These are computers that do all of this stuff. So the day trader and the home investor, unless you actually know which side of the trade is going to happen, you're screwed if you try to do something, because it can wipe you out in that 2 seconds at the algorithms. But the other side of the coin is that they've rigged the system so much, okay, with these algorithms, that if the government and the Fed, using the ESF, the Exchange Security Fund or something like that, the Emergency Stabilization Fund. And I'll tell you how that came about here in a second. But the ESF is what the government uses. It's got trillions and trillions of dollars in it. And if they want to move a market a certain way, they don't go and buy a bunch of stocks. What they'll do, because they know that the high frequency trading computers will follow the lead, they will go out and buy Japanese yen. And you can see it when Japanese yen against the dollar is going up, fairly astronomically, almost straight up. You'll see suddenly the S&P will start
stocks
going
will
at
go
the
up
same track because what
it will
happens is
follow all of those trades or buying up that currency. It will follow that automatically, and the stock will just automatically go up in a couple seconds.
So the government can spend about $10 million buying Japanese yen, and then the high frequency algorithm computers will suddenly buy something like $10 to $50 billion worth of stock and go the way the government or the central bank wants it to go.
It would be like, essentially, I'll take it to, I guess, an analogy that is kind of close to me, where like playing video blackjack, which I've played probably too much, but it would be like playing that, but being the programmer, so but it actually wouldn't even be that, because you're not directly, you're doing something else to affect that. So, but or it would be like, going out and breaking the leg of the quarterback and betting on a football game. Like, basically they know by doing certain things, they know how it's going to affect the system already.
Yeah, it would be like this. If you know that the team's going to do a running play, then instead of having a nickel defense, you could put in 5 defensive linemen and 5 more linebackers and stack the box. That's pretty much what it is.
You know what the play is.
Yeah, exactly.
So you know how to defend against it.
Here's where the ESF comes from, and others know it as the plunge protection team. These type of things. Back in 1933, when FDR did his executive order outlawing gold and confiscating all the gold,
right?
They did something entirely different. Not only did they take the gold, they paid people off for their gold at $20.42.
And then they raised it. Right?
Then they raised the price to
like $35 or something.
Yeah, $35. It would eventually go to $42, but $35 at that time. And the government took the profit from the difference, the arbitrage between the 2042 and 35, which is approximately $15.
Right, because they paid the people $20, and then now they have an extra 15 because they raised the value of it.
They took, for every ounce of gold, they took that $15 difference and they put it into a fund known as the Emergency Stabilization Fund. It was initially set up to allow the government to intervene in markets if you had another 1929 stock market crash. Well, this was in 1933. How much do you think that fund has accumulated over the last 80 plus years? That's why I'm saying it's in the trillions, and it's a secret little compartment of the Treasury Department.
And there's trillions of dollars within that fund?
Yeah, by now there are trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars in that fund. And it all came from ripping off the American people by confiscating their gold and repricing it.
And then I remember you also, just so everybody knows as well, you also mentioned that people later could still turn in their gold for dollars, but they get the same price even after.
Yeah.
They would never give them the higher price.
Right. And it was 35 from 1933 until 1946, and then it was boosted up to 42 after Bretton Woods because we were supposed to be on the gold standard. Now, interestingly enough, I know we've got some modern things to talk about, but there has been a misnomer, and even I've been guilty of it because we despise Keynes and Keynesianism so much. But there's a misnomer that John Maynard Keynes hated gold, wanted to get off the gold standard, just wanted to print money into oblivion and have, not care about it. Most of that is actually wrong. Okay. There's a famous quote that most people misrepresent with John Maynard Keynes. They say that John Maynard Keynes said that gold is a barbarous relic. No. He actually, I got a hold of somebody who got a hold of the copy of one of his books, a first printing from early 1920s. And this is what he said. John Maynard Keynes said that the current monetary policies of nations under the gold standard are a barbarous relic. Okay, he's not saying that gold is bad or that the gold standard is bad. He says that the way that nations do their monetary policies, and here's what ended up happening. After World War I, most of the countries were in debt. You know, they had to borrow a ton of gold from J.P. Morgan,
Right.
the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, and you know, they got into massive debt. Well, what ended up happening was there was this big call in Europe to get rid of the gold standard. And Winston Churchill, who had been Assistant Secretary of the Navy in World War I, he was put in a position where he could decide to either redo the gold standard, get rid of the gold standard. And John Maynard Keynes went to Winston Churchill and said, keep the gold standard, but do not price gold as you did prior to World War I. You need to price it double what you did because you've expanded your money supply, 200%. And Winston Churchill, because he was really, a bastard child of one of the kings. I forget who he was, which one, but he was dumb as a box of rocks, and he decided, no, we're going to keep the gold price. We don't want gold price to go up, so we're going to keep it at the other. And since you have gold at a certain price, and you've expanded the money supply 200%. What
the
naturally
money's
happens?
Worth less. It's like we talked about the stock. When you dilute the stock,
you have massive inflation, and this is what led to the depression all over Europe in the 1920s. Because not just Churchill did it, Germany did it, Italy did it, everybody did it. They repriced gold at the old thing when they've got this expanded money supply. So you had this massive inflation. You created a depression all through the 20s, which then led to revolutions, riots, the rise of Mussolini in Italy, the rise of Hitler in Germany, all of these things, because they forced a gold price that didn't coincide with the amount of money they have in existence, okay, their money supply. Right. Now, let me take this example and move it forward, okay? There's been, central banks, because they've misinterpreted what Keynes said, absolutely abhor a gold standard. And I don't know why. If you have the correct type of gold standard, you can print as much money as you want and you will hold down inflation. But they took it off the gold standard.
Well,
and then they printed as much money, and it created this mass inflation and devaluation.
But the reason behind that was because of Vietnam, that they couldn't afford, Nixon couldn't afford to pay for Vietnam or something.
You're right. But what should have happened? Let's go back to what the choices that John Maynard Keynes gave to Churchill.
I'm not saying that was a good idea. I'm saying
is had they repriced gold in 1964, just before the Vietnam War, then they could have expanded the money supply.
Well,
and
maybe
cause the inflation.
Maybe not get involved in a fucking war you can't afford.
Yeah, that's a given. Take the wars out of there. Take the wars out of there. We're just dealing with a monetary base.
Well, maybe not do anything you can't afford. I mean, I know if it gets to a certain point, then I understand increasing, but in a way that's not going to, not doubling it where it's going to create all this inflation. But when it comes down to it, it's the same way. I don't care what anybody says. I know that a country is different from your household, but it's still the concept to me is still the same, that if you can't afford to fucking buy shit, then don't fucking buy it.
Well, true. But you know what? Just as there are psychopaths in government, and psychopaths are attracted to government.
Well, most of them, it's sociopaths.
Every family has a crazy drunk uncle, don't they? Every family's got that crazy drunk uncle who sometimes you find out he's a pedophile who's been molesting your kids or other kids in the family. Some others, he's just a bum on the street and people don't want to invite him over to Thanksgiving dinner. Either way, every family, just like every government, has their share of crazy, drunk uncles. Okay, so you can't get rid of it. You can try to push them out, but most of them are attracted to the dark side. And in today's
Well, most of
world,
them are
just
attracted to government.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. The dark side. You know where the psychopaths go? The psychopaths go to two different places.
Wall Street and fucking government.
There you go. Because most psychopaths have a disconnect in their emotion system, in their brain. They don't feel emotions. And
right,
so
and just so people know, and basically just what you said, that the definition of a psychopath does not mean somebody who's going around murdering people. It's just somebody who has no
empathy.
Feelings. Yeah, exactly. That they don't care. Like a lot of con men are psychopaths because they don't care about hurting people. It just doesn't bother them. They don't have those type of feelings.
And this is why they can be great. They can be incredible, charismatic con men. Is because if you don't have any empathy, that means you have no guilt, you have no remorse.
Right. So you can
lie
do anything
to somebody's face, and you don't feel that inner conscience that's saying, "God, I'm lying." And people, and they come across like Obama. Obama is a narcissistic psychopath, but he has this charisma and people believe in him, but he lies about everything. It's the same way with John Boehner when he was Speaker of the House.
I would say
it has
probably
to do with McConnell. It has to do with a lot of them.
I would say 90-something% of politicians. I'm sure there's some here and there, but the majority of them, just for that simple factor, like you said earlier, that it's what they're attracted to.
I limit the amount of psychopaths and sociopaths that are in Congress. I just think at a certain point, a good person will give into temptation and willing to sacrifice his soul. There's a lot of people in Congress who don't have sociopathic or psychopathic tendencies, but to get where they've gotten, they sacrifice their moral compass.
Yeah,
they don't. They may feel guilt. You take a look at somebody like Joe Biden. Joe Biden.
I think he's just a moron, but
exactly, he's a low IQ moron, and he gives a lot of feelings, so you can tell he's not a psychopath, but he's also one of those guys you can tell who, when he was growing up, was treated like schoolyard bullies on there. And even when he went to college, and I think on his bar exam, it was proven that he plagiarized. So he wasn't smart enough to actually succeed on his own merits. He had to cheat. And if you're willing to cheat just to get ahead in a bar exam or your college things, you get politics where cheating is a mandatory, then there you go.
Cheating's encouraged.
Encouraged. As a matter of fact, there's a big joke that goes on with Dr. Jim Willey. Dr. Jim Willey says that if you want to be president in the oligarchy, you have to have committed treason, because the only way that you actually get in there is that the establishment, the powers that be, if they have something on you, then they know they can control you. Then they're more than happy for you to get into a position of power. Because if you slip up and go against them, they will rain down hell on you for your skeletons. It's the same way at Goldman Sachs. Dr. Jim Willey says, if you want to become a vice president at Goldman Sachs, you have to have committed at least a $100 million fraud and gotten away with it. That's the way they want people who are willing to take risks and willing to commit the fraud for profit.
Well, now you have with the NSA, I mean, they're spying on all of Congress as well. So now it's, even things that maybe might not be that bad, but are still things that if people found out, they might not vote for you, or it would be embarrassing, or it might ruin your career. I mean, they have all that on people.
Do you remember when Bill was in? I don't know how old you may have been at the time, but when Bill was in as president, Bill Clinton, and Hillary was first lady, they were caught with 900 and some odd FBI files on members of Congress in the White House in their locked safe. They knew all the stuff, and they used it for blackmail against Congress to get their way. That's the way the game is played. And to be honest, this is why good people do not want to get into politics. Okay? Because one, it will destroy you if you're a morally sound person. And two, the temptations to go to the dark side are so, it's that big joke, come to the dark side. We have cookies. There's always a temptation. You are going to be tempted every single minute of every day. And it starts out small and you think that you're doing it for the right reasons, but you have to have a moral compass and integrity that is so great. And here's the problem is once you do, then all of these PACs and corporations and lobbyists, they're going to put $500 million in the pocket of the guy running against you in the next election.
You're not going to win.
And you're gone.
That's the whole thing, that you're not going to win anyway. So
if you don't play ball, then you won't even be invited to the field.
You can't. I mean, maybe on a local level, you can get by, but you're not going to be in Washington.
This is also why I've come to the realization, and people will tear out their hair and rant and rave and think that they can change it and do all these movements and all this. No, we are at a point where there's a paradigm shift coming. And this is why it's not about Sanders. It's not about Trump. It's because the people have suddenly reached the point of too much. And it's angry. Did you ever see that movie? What was it? Oh God, where it had that reporter who did that famous speech. I'm mad as hell.
Yeah,
I'm not going to take it anymore.
Yeah.
That's exactly what most of America has gotten.
Like
but it's not just America.
News or something.
It's broadcast. Anyway, it's happening in Europe. You have right-wing parties that have taken over in Greece that are rising up for secession in Spain. In Scotland, they did a secession thing. You have Marine Le Pen, who's a right-wing in France that has is going to take over from Hollande. You have Merkel under severe from right-wing parties. There's a frequency in the world. It's a cycle.
But people are
changing.
People are too stupid because they just go with, and we'll talk about this later if we have time. But I like with Trump,
they'll follow the demagogue or the iconoclast.
Just because like Trump is, he's an outsider, he's different, but they're not really looking at the shit that he's saying because the shit that he's saying is pretty fucked up.
That's just it.
So
the stuff he's saying are the things that most angry white Americans in particular, but a lot of Americans, but angry white Americans have been wanting to say for a long time and have been afraid to, because if they say it, then they're going to the establishment's going to come down. You're racist.
Well, I'm not talking about that stuff. I'm talking about the stuff that he says that he's going to do, because he's talking. I mean, basically everything he said he's going to do is totally anti-freedom.
Well, yeah,
so it is.
The thing is, Trump is and always will be hyperbole. Okay, he throws an exaggerated statement on the wall, and maybe half of it'll stick. But in the meantime, you're fascinated by the gunk that's sliding down the wall.
He's a fucking clown, and we could talk about it. We'll talk about it later. But just in general, it's that same thing with. Look what happened with Obama, and it was people were fed up and they're like, yeah, the hope and change. And they got caught up in that. People think that, if we just get the right guy in there, we just got to find this right guy. It just goes, it's the same thing over and over again.
That's how
Plus, it's rigged anyway. It's rigged anyway. So if Trump gets in there, it's because they wanted him to get in there. I think it's going to end up being Hillary. And I think it was promised to Hillary in 2008. And that's why, there was this whole thing where they got a bunch of reporters on a plane and Obama was supposed to be on that plane and he wasn't. And that's when Bilderberg was in Virginia. And I talked about that last night. But we can talk a little about that towards the end. But, yeah, it's just the same bullshit over and
so
over again.
the point of all of this is that there's a sea change going on. Okay, there's a sea change going on financially. The world is rushing. They never fixed the problem of 2008. All they did was print a bunch more money, mask it, expand the credit levels to exorbitant points. However, the downside of that is once you hit that point of no return, then you are eventually going to go to ultimate collapse, and there's nothing you can do to save it. So what they're doing is they're just doing piecemeal things like negative interest rates.
Band-Aids. It's all Band-Aids.
Or talking about banning cash, go electronic system, yada, yada, yada. They're doing these things because they're trying to keep the system going as far as they can to squeeze as much wealth as they can so that when the system does fail, they have all of this stuff offshored or in physical assets. So when the new system comes about, they'll remain at their levels of top. And let me tell you something. It's not just the 1% versus the 99%. Those who are in the top 10% have just as much a dog-eat-dog world as, you and I do against a bank trying to foreclose upon us.
Right.
Those who have like 1 to 10 million in the upper levels, they're nobodies.
Yeah,
they have no say. They have no nothing. Those who have say 100 million, they're really their wealth is in danger of being taken by the billionaires and the ultra rich. See, it's a whole new level, and this is what people don't realize when they go to jobs. If you think that a promotion's a great thing, it's a whole new ball game, because not only do you have new bosses, but you have bosses who have stepped over other people on their way to the top, and they see you as a threat. And that's the way that those, the whole system, as you climb higher, it's all about
people trying to knock each
tear
other
down
out.
the person in front of you, while at the same time kick the person who's trying to get your job in the face as you're climbing up the ladder. This is why the whole thing goes in cycles, and it rises and falls. And we're getting that point of the next collapse. And what people have to do is they have to get their heads out of the system that the government's going to save us, or the central bank's going to save us, or the dollar's going to last, or no. If you keep your money in the system right now, whether it's in Japan, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in U.S., whether it's in China, doesn't matter. If you keep your money in the system, they will either confiscate it or they will inflate it into nothingness. Okay? So these are the times that you need to be moving out of the system. And you know what? This is the thing I've told people. Getting your money out of a bank, out of dollars, euros, yen, whatever, and into gold and silver is actually the best form of rebellion that you can do against the oligarchy. Because if you have a 401k, if you have an annuity, if you have stocks, if you have bonds, if you have real estate, every single thing of those, or if you do currencies and you have dollars and euros, whatever, every single one of those has a counterparty. Most people don't understand what counterparty is. It's something that is a risk to you potentially losing either value or the entirety of your asset.
Right.
People ask, well, I've got a house. That's real estate. What counterparty risk is that? You have a government that has property taxes against you. You have a potential of a fire that could destroy your thing.
Well, the government can take your fucking house away.
Eminent domain.
And Donald Trump loves that.
There are counterparty risks to everything, okay? Except one thing does not have any counterparty risk at all. You know what that is? Gold and silver.
Well, just the fact that somebody, if they found it, they could physically take it from you. But
I mean, but we're not talking about the system itself.
Well, I would say, anything. Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of things that maintain their value, and that's the problem. I mean, when you buy something, whether it be a car or a computer or whatever, yeah, it has some kind of value, but its value decreases right away. It doesn't maintain its value.
Yeah, Any physically formed asset, that's the thing about it is unlike something like uranium, which has a half-life, gold doesn't have a half-life.
I think maybe guns may go up at some point, but
anything that's rare, anything that's
things
rare
like that,
or practical is going to do that. But
yeah.
gold is one of those elements, and this is one of the main reasons why almost over every single other metal, gold does not break down. It doesn't deteriorate. Okay, it's not good for any other industrial use. Like it doesn't allow for electricity. Conduct electricity. It doesn't work in catalytic converters. It doesn't do that. But it doesn't break down.
Well, it looks good, around my neck and on my wrist.
People like the color, and it works good. It's
on
malleable, so it's good at jewelry, and it's something that's recognizable around the world.
Well, and it's been around forever. I mean, gold is not something that's new. It's held its value for thousands of years.
There's big. You may have seen the old Ron Paul video when he's still in Congress and he's talking to Bernanke. Bernanke's in a conference there on the Hill, and Ron Paul asks Bernanke, he goes, "Do you think gold is money?" And Bernanke looks at him and goes, "No." And Ron Paul goes, "So why does the central banks hold it?" And Bernanke you could see he paused for a long time. He's trying to think of an excuse. He said, "It's tradition." And Ron Paul says, "Well, why don't they hold diamonds?" He didn't have an answer for it. But the point is that, prior to the De Beers taking over the diamond mines in South Africa, diamonds were almost a worthless gem. If you take a look at, and if you just look at some historical artwork, you will find that almost all the crown jewels or what was put into the pyramids or whatever, they were never diamonds. They found emeralds, rubies, sapphires, colored stones, far greater value. As a matter of fact, the British, the crown jewel, are precious colored stones. There's no diamonds in them except when they replaced it with, I think it was the Hope diamond. But it wasn't until De Beers got the cartel for the diamonds and went to the King and Queen of England and said, "Hey, you want to start a trend and sort of tell the commoners to start buying diamonds?"
Yeah, so, now you have it in every girl's head that she needs a big fucking diamond engagement ring.
And diamonds are as cheap as coal. I mean, quantity on the earth. The cartel, there are warehouses. Imagine a warehouse the size of a football field stacked entirely with diamonds. Now multiply that by 100. That's what De Beers keeps in there, and they just trickle them out on the market to keep the price up. But diamonds are pretty much a dime a dozen. But because of perception, and that's the key thing, is perception of value is what causes all these assets to have value. People believe the dollar is of value, so they use it as currency. But the dollar is a Federal Reserve
forced
note.
to accept it.
Yeah.
I mean, businesses you can't open a business and say, I'm not taking your dollars, I'm only taking gold. You'll get shut down.
True. But here's the thing. It's only good in the capacity in the place that they can use the force on you. The power of the government and all the military backing it says that Americans will use dollars in all transactions. Well, if you go to like Thailand, they may take your dollars, they may not. But if you go there with gold and silver, they'll roll out the red carpet for you. So the dollar is only as fungible as, to a limited capacity. It's the same thing with pretty much all other. If I took a stock certificate in Apple, from the New York Stock Exchange, and I went to Zimbabwe, and I said, "Hey, here's stock in Apple. I want to exchange this for something of value." They just start their lighter and burn it up and say, well, "That's worthless." And I was listening to commentary today, and somebody was saying, "Yeah, I've got $500 million in the market. I'm worth $500 million." And they looked at him. I think it was Peter Schiff. He said, "No, you have $500 million of ones and zeros. Your entire portfolio is electronic. It's of no real tangible value." And that's absolutely true. But it's perception.
Yeah,
I think that's why
collapse at any time.
That's why real estate and physical gold and silver and mineral rights and something that's tangible, this is why it's of vast importance. But the majority of investments are in ones and zeros.
The other thing I would say that is of value, if you have, say, farmland and you're able to grow your own food and crops and stuff like that, that's something that, especially in a collapse, that's going to be of value if you're able to produce your own food and those type of things. But I mean, there's very few things, I think, that would really have a lot of value in a collapse, a financial collapse.
Right. Yep. So, that's what we're doing today is you've got to consolidate yourself to protect what wealth you have, because the system is changing. Now, you're right. We can't predict exactly when the collapse is going to occur. But you know what? Nobody really saw the exact day of when it was going to happen in 2008. Nobody knew in 2007 when the housing bubble was going to collapse. Nobody knew in 1987 in the Black Monday stock market. But there were a lot of warning signs leading up to it. And those who prepared were absolutely fine. And they profited because there is more money to be made in chaos than there is in the good times when everything's regulated and there's just not a lot of volatility in the markets.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you have all of these things that people want, but there's not a lot of it, if you're the one with, all the gold or all the guns or all the food and all the water or whatever, and things that people don't have, and you have an excess amount, well, I guess if there's no, if they don't have any gold or anything to give you, I don't know how that's going to help you. But I know, yeah, like when the housing market collapsed, if you had a bunch of money, you were in a great position because you could buy up all this real estate cheap.
Exactly.
And that's what all these banks or investment banks and hedge funds and whatever.
Now, you remember what I told you about in politics, or like even in the corporate world, is once you get a certain level of power, there's this compulsion to move up and keep moving up. And well, usually when you move up, you have to leverage something. Okay. And it's just that way in real estate. One of the reasons that so many people got screwed during the housing bubble type scenario is it reminds me of the movie The Big Short, when they're driving through the housing area that's all going under, and the realtor looks over and she points out and says, "See that house right there? 2.5 years ago, I sold it for $350,000. Then just 18 months ago, I sold it for $450. Then a year ago, $580, and 6 months ago, $650. You know how much commission she probably made on each one of those sales at 6%? They
were making a lot of. I mean, between the real estate agents and the mortgage brokers, that's why they didn't give a fuck neither that they were, people were going stated income and that they couldn't afford it or whatever, because if they could get it by, they didn't care because they were making a lot of money, all this commission off it.
And what did they do with that money? Did they take some for a rainy day, or did they
Probably
just spend as if it was never going to end?
Probably a lot of them, the majority of them, that's what they did, is they probably spent it like they're gonna, I'm making this. There's that saying, and it's true to most people: the more you make, the more you spend. So someone gets a raise or starts making more money. Hey, maybe 10 years ago they lived off a certain amount of money, and now maybe their salary's increased, but for some reason they're still in the same position where they can't save any money. It's because they buy a more expensive house or get a more expensive car or whatever. They take on more debt because they're like, hey, now I have this coming in. But they just assume that, well, this will always be coming in.
And now you hit it. And this is why throughout history, when things get over kilted, out of kilt and too expansive, that the natural course is for an implosion. And it's like what happened to our grandparents. Our grandparents lived or grew up during the Great Depression, and they knew that their parents didn't have a lot of money, and they had to they had hand-me-down clothes, and then they if they wanted a comic book, a lot of kids would just wait outside in the trash cans and find a comic book somebody else didn't want. People learned to get their goods as cheaply as possible, and it didn't have to be new. And those who came out of the Great Depression had a fiscal responsibility that they were never, ever, ever going to be put in that situation again. And this is one of the reasons why they were so fiscally prudent. Well, sometimes when you get too much on the scale and too miserly, it causes your kids especially to want more. And so, the baby boomers who came, who were the offspring of the Depression era children, they wanted, the brass ring. They wanted all these things that their parents wouldn't go borrow money to do. And so it led up again to the 1980s, and then we had the fall of the 70s, and then we had the 1980s where greed is good. Everybody watched Wall Street, and then we had the 1987 crash.
Well, the same thing, especially in the 80s and 90s, you had TV and the media and people seeing all of these things that, everybody had this and everybody had that, and they'd see all these people on TV with all of these things, and then, I got to have this and I got to have that, and people would put themselves in debt to have all these things that they really can't afford and they shouldn't have. But they felt like, hey, well, all these other people, the perception was, well, everybody on TV has it, so I guess everybody has this. And it doesn't matter what you can afford. It's just, just go into debt, getting these things.
And what else happened is that after the 1970s, when Nixon opened the door to China, and that was really when China started and Japan started with cheaper labor, making the same products we could for like 1/3 of the price. As a matter of fact, they said it was cheaper to buy it from China than it was to manufacture steel wholesale. And so you have the entire Rust Belt go out. And the government realized that the productivity of America was dying in the late 70s. And to fund this thing, they had to change to a consumer-based society. Well, if you have a consumer-based society, you're limited by the amount of money you can spend via your wages, right? Unless you open up the credit spigot to everybody. And so, going into the late 80s and the 90s, not only could anybody buy a mortgage, they had credit cards for students going to college. They had, you just name it. And there was credit available for everybody, because the more credit that people could max out their credit cards or borrow on or get mortgages and the whole nine yards, the more that they could do that, the higher the revenues would come in, higher productivity, or the corporations would sell more products, the government would get more tax revenues because of sales tax, and that's how they did it. Well, at a certain point, like we saw in 2008 with the McMansions and everybody, the foreclosures, even the consumer runs out of the ability to borrow. And now that the production is gone, and you can say what you want about Donald Trump, but he's absolutely right.
But that hasn't
We
changed
don't have
neither.
any industry. We've got to pull the industry. We can't go and sell products in China because they have their barriers. Nobody, they have, like, the gatekeeper won't let them in. But we don't have that same gatekeeper, and China can sell everything back. And here's why he wants to put tariffs, is because all of our companies went to China to use their labor in their factories. Apple builds their entire Apple line, the iPod, the Mac, the whole 9 yards, in China. So here's an American company not creating jobs for Americans, doing it in China, and then coming back and trying to sell the goods to Americans. Well, if Americans don't have good jobs, how are they going to buy these products? They can't unless they do credit. And we are now at another credit bubble.
That's what I'm saying. Credit hasn't changed. You can still get all of this money,
but they
the same way you could.
Like I was saying, after the 70s, when the government realized that the productive component of GDP was gone, they had to do two things. They had to increase consumer spending, and they had to increase government spending. And that's why the government expanded so much under Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, you name it. It's expanded to a massive amount where there's like 2.8 million people who work for the federal government. And government spending $600 billion for the military-industrial complex, the DoD, and so much and so forth.
Yeah,
okay?
and Trump wants to spend even more than that. So,
yeah.
But speaking of the 2008 and the collapse, one of the things I wanted to talk about is one of the articles that you wrote regarding some documents that were declassified.
Yeah,
recently.
let me find it real quick. Here it is. Just like we had the Warren Commission, 9/11 Commission. Well, there was a commission that was created to look over for the reasons behind the 2008 credit crisis. It was called the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission, the FCIC. And just recently, within the last week or 10 days, they have released under FOIA a number of documents of what went on behind closed doors in that FCIC. And here is one of the most interesting things that was discussed. It was regarding Alan Greenspan, the architect of the 2008 housing bubble and credit crisis. It shows that Alan Greenspan admitted behind closed doors to the FCIC that he never saw the bubble or the coming collapse, and he said this. And don't believe any financial pundits who say that they saw it coming, because nobody could predict it, and we can't predict it. That's one side. For another side, it was talking about the FCIC was set up to, let's see, let me see the most important part.
There were people that did predict it. So was he just obviously lying because...
Well, yeah, but that goes back to what I was saying about the establishment and then the alternative media and the establishment and those who are outside. Those in the alternative media who looked at the data as it really is, they didn't hide it behind 4.9% unemployment rate or 2.5% GDP when really GDP is negative 7%. They looked at the actual numbers and they said, we can use the movie The Big Short. Michael Burry saw it 2.5 years before it was going to happen. He said, this has happened before. It happened in the 1930s. When the Great Depression hit, there was a housing collapse because prices had been artificially pushed higher and people couldn't afford it. And so he bet against it. And then others started seeing it and it spiraled. And of course, the housing bubble collapsed. Today we have the Fed, through credit, doesn't realize the natural course is that when you expand a money supply, that is the truest definition of inflation. And when you expand the money supply to the point that you lose confidence in that money, the dollar, the euro, whatever, that's when you have hyperinflation, because if people don't have confidence in the money, then no amount of money will ever buy a tangible good.
Well, right now, what I call government media is saying how strong the dollar is, and maybe compared to other countries that are devaluing their currency, it's strong. But I mean, it's all an illusion.
Yeah, and here I think is the important thing about the FCIC inquiry commission that you wanted to look at. Let me find it here. Not only did the Obama administration fail to indict criminals from the banking sector who defrauded the American people, in many cases they even abetted their crimes in a quid pro quo masquerade of fines and payola. This is what led Attorney General Eric Holder, who is a Wall Street lawyer with massive ties to the banks to begin with, to make fallacious claim that banks were too big to jail, carrying over on Paulson's too big to fail. Eric Holder ignored FCIC recommendations for prosecution in favor of small fines that allowed the participants to never answer for their crimes. And in fact, what happens to a criminal who is given a second chance? He thinks he's invulnerable, and he's going to keep doing it until he gets punished.
Well, definitely those type of criminals.
Here's the key thing from the documents. The U.S. believes that there is evidentiary basis to compromise potential legal claims by the U.S. against Morgan Stanley for violations of federal laws in connection with the packaging, marketing, sale, blah, blah, of RMBS, of the mortgage-backed securities. What this means is that the Justice Department wasn't sure that the case against Morgan Stanley was winnable. The two sides hammered out a settlement, every single word of which you can bet was heavily negotiated. Justice Department got money, aka a fine. They could trumpet a victory. Hey, look what we did. We fined the banks. And Morgan Stanley and its employees walked away. This is why only one person, a low-level middle manager, was the only one indicted for the entire 2008 financial crisis, even though they had so much evidence beyond the scope. But when you're the oligarchy and the banks and corporations are the government and have bought off this, then the regulators already are bought and paid for. The congressmen are bought and paid for.
Well, they all used to either it's a
and
revolving door, right?
Wall
Hank
Street
Paulson was the head of Goldman Sachs,
and
before he was
was
Secretary of Treasury.
John Corzine was the head of Goldman Sachs, and he was he was the campaign director for Obama.
Well, he was also was he, governor or senator from New Jersey?
Yeah, New Jersey. Yep, and he bankrupted and left. Then we have Timothy Geithner, who was the head of the New York Fed, who became Treasury Secretary.
Yeah,
Jack Lew worked for Citigroup. What's his name? Eric Holder. Eric Holder not only had an office on Wall Street before he became Attorney General, they kept the office for him, and he moved directly back when he left the Obama administration last year.
Yeah, it's essentially, I mean, that's another reason why all of these things that they do for all of the banks and corporations and stuff like that, it's for after they leave as well. It's not just about getting elected. It's also about it's like a revolving door. They go from the private sector to government, back and forth. Some of them even become lobbyists. A lot of former congressmen.
That's because they are the same.
Yeah, it's
the purest definition of fascism. That's what Mussolini said. Fascism is the merging of corporate and state.
Right.
And that's what we are. So the thing about it is to realize that just as the establishment is looking to change the rules at the convention to make sure that Trump or Cruz do not become the candidate, even willing that Hillary Clinton wins, because it doesn't matter, because Hillary Clinton's part of the establishment and the Republican Party is part of the establishment.
Yeah, they're both.
They're all the same.
They're right. It's like wrestling, basically. It's a big, rigged fucking game where
Bingo.
it's all the same. They're all part of the same team. It's all controlled, and it doesn't matter who gets elected because
Now,
it's not going to make a difference.
Now what's happening? We'll scoot back to what happened today and what's happening around a lot of central banks around the world. Because they decided not to allow the banks to fail and the toxic debts to, just get funneled out of the system, go through a long recession like Iceland did, and restart. By the way, you know what Iceland did? Not only did they jail their bankers and default on the debt to the Eurozone, but 2 weeks ago, the finance minister and the leader of Iceland did a jubilee on the entire island. They just declared all the debts that the people owed, whether on their homes, whether on their cars, whether on anything. All the debts were gone.
Wow.
They did a jubilee on their people. And then people wonder why Iceland is the highest growing economy in the Eurozone.
They have other issues that I would have with Iceland and other areas with their government when it comes to freedom, but at least on the bank side, they're like Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, you don't want to get a DUI in Iceland, because what you'll do is you'll have a year of doing hard labor, and if you do it a second time, you get expelled from the island.
Well, you can't own a gun there neither.
True, but you really don't need to. As a matter of fact, I had a. We'll do this on a side note. When I was in the military, there was a guy who had been stationed in Iceland. He was staff sergeant. He was single, and because it's a colder climate and they have a problem with birth rates, they don't see marriage the same way that we do here in the West. They're very open society. And one time the guy the staff sergeant was at a club, and this young girl, probably about age 16, came up to him. She looked older. He didn't know. Anyway, she invited him home and, to sleep with him. And that morning, in walks her husband. And of course, the staff sergeant's sitting there scared to death. He's sitting there in bed naked. And the husband looks over at him and he says, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. And I forgot my keys." And he grabbed his keys and left. The problem is that, as she told him, that he was sterile and they couldn't have any kids. So she was trying to get pregnant from the staff sergeant or whomever so that they could have kids. And it was just a liaison for that. That's the open society they have in Iceland. So, like I said, just side note. Anyway.
Well, there's people that do that here.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's called swingers.
Yeah. Well, there's also in New Hampshire, it's a smaller movement. And personally, I don't give a fuck what people do, but that's not for me. I don't want people, messing around with my girlfriend or my wife. But
to each their own.
Polyamory, where they date they actually have multiple relationships. I did a show on it.
These days in the U.S., STDs are at an all-time high, and of course HIV is always a fear, so that's not something I prefer to even consider.
Well, that's not something I would do neither. I'm just saying what some people are doing, because personally I don't care. Whatever you want to do, as long as you're not hurting anybody, if that's agreed upon in your relationship, then that's your business. Personally, it's not for me, but there are people that do that.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, what we talked about in the original was in December, the Fed raised rates. It was more of a credibility issue rather than do it, because you don't raise rates in a deflationary environment.
Right.
And when they came out and raised rates, they said, we plan, all the indicators are good. Unemployment's down. The GDP, inflation's not as high as we want, but we are expected to raise rates probably 3 or 4 times over the next year, and maybe 8 times total over the next 2 years. They came out in January and decided, no, we're not going to raise rates again, and so they waited to the March
they said
thing.
No again, right?
Not only did they say no, but they retracted
that they're going to raise them over 8 times over the next 2 years.
Exactly. So, needless to say, the dollar dropped to 95 in the index for the first time in like 6-8 months. Gold went up $30 today, and the stock market, which should have just went super duper, knowing they're going to get a bunch of free money, it closed down closed barely over 100 points. So, and most of that's the algos. The algos just shot up on that. But the point is that the central banks know that no amount that they are impotent. They have no ammunition left. Nothing that they can do is actually going to stimulate anything. So they are starting to get into desperate situations. Negative interest rates. There are now 4 countries that have negative interest rates.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about that. Speaking of Iceland giving their money back,
yeah, but okay, we got
giving debt back. But
Sweden, Switzerland, the Bank of Japan, and
New Zealand.
No,
right?
New Zealand's doing something different. But and I'll get to that in a second.
Oh, okay.
But there's another one with it. But here, that's not the problem.
Oh, you're talking about negative interest rates. I thought you were talking about free money. I'm not talking about the free money. Right.
Helicopter money. But they're at negative interest rates for their interbank lending. Now, here's where it gets tricky. There is what the central banks can control with interest rates, and then there are things that the market takes into its own hands, the invisible hand taking control. Because they've kept interest rates down at 0 for so long, and because central banks have just bought up every bond that's out there, they're running out of assets to buy. The problem is that 40%, $7 trillion worth of sovereign debt is now negative interest rates. Now, what I mean by negative interest rates is this. Say you buy a bond for $10,000, whether it's a corporate bond, a municipal bond, a sovereign bond, like U.S. Treasury is a sovereign bond. Say you buy Greek debt, a Greek bond for $10,000 and it's negative interest rates. That means after the maturity of it, say it's a 2-year bond, and it's at negative 0.5. So it's 50 basis points negative. That means at the end of 2 years, you won't get your $10,000 plus some interest. You'll get back about $9,500.
Yeah, why would anybody do that?
Why would anybody do that? Nobody's buying bonds. That's the point. The central banks are just buying all these things. They're doing it so that the governments can stay solvent.
Hey, I want to give you some money. I want to lose money on a bond. Yeah, that's just crazy. But on the other side of that, you have countries that are giving their people money, just giving out free money. Yep.
Starting in December, and there's now 4 countries that are proposing this or about to implement it. Starting in December, Sweden. Yeah, Sweden.
Switzerland.
No, Switzerland is started 2 weeks later. But first it was Sweden.
Oh, okay.
And they said that...
or Finland in December.
Well, that's
what it says. I'm looking at your article, so that's why.
Yeah, all the Nordic countries are all screwed up. I can't remember.
Yeah, Finland in December, then Switzerland a month later. And
what they did is they're proposing to give everybody, not just those who qualify for welfare, they're just going to give everybody 800 euros. In the case of Switzerland, they're talking 2,500 euros per person. And then it moved over to Canada. Ontario is going to give 800 Canadian dollars. New Zealand now is talking about giving money.
I mean, Bush did a similar thing, but it was called a tax refund.
Right.
Like where everybody got like $300 or $600. I think I got like 300 in 2000.
Yeah, if you were married, you got 600. If you were single, you got 300.
Yeah, so
and that's meant to get people to spend money to stimulate the economy. Remember what I said? The world is now a This is why China and Japan don't have to do this, because they produce. Their GDP is based on production. Everybody else is based on consumerism. So if your GDP and your revenues and your taxes are all based on consumption, then if people are broke and they don't have high-paying jobs, how are they going to spend money? So you have to start giving them money. And here's the other thing is, besides countries starting to give out money, helicopter money, negative interest rates only works if you can absolutely control the monetary system. Okay? Because if they're going to start doing negative interest rates and start charging you for holding money in the bank, what are people going to do? They're going to pull all their money out of the bank. And guess what? That's happening by the boatload in Japan. There's an article I've got out somewhere.
So is that, they're doing that with bank accounts, that they're charging negative interest rates? So
on every paper asset, because they don't want you to save. And Japan is just like in India. It's in their culture to buy gold and own gold. Okay, even the poorest schlep at the lowest end of the caste system has gold chains. In Japan, they're a nation of savers. It means they don't spend. When economic times are rough, they don't spend, and this is what is destroying Kuroda's attempted, zero interest rates. He had to go negative interest rates. He's trying to force people to spend their money, their savings, and so what people are doing. They have sold out completely of personal safes, and the Bank of Japan is having a difficult time because they've run out of the 10,000 yen bills because everybody's just pulling everything out of the bank. So what they've done is, by trying to force people to spend, now they've caused the people to panic, and they're pulling everything out, and they're not spending their money, they're holding it, which is going to, of course, exacerbate the problem. They need people to spend, so you start implementing these draconian things, scare people to death, and they're not going to spend jack squat.
Right.
And so the same thing is happening around the world, and those countries that are finding that people aren't spending, like Finland, Switzerland, Canada, New Zealand, talking about it, they're going to just give them money and expect them to spend. The funny thing is, and here's the kicker, if you're going to do negative interest rates, and obviously Japan is proving it, if you're going to have bank runs and people aren't going to trust banks, what do governments and central banks have to do to make their negative interest rate works? They have to get rid of cash. They have to make it so everybody has a bank account. It's electronic, and you no longer have the freedom of trust in that you can always take your money out of the bank. And that's what the big talk has been about, of getting rid of the 500 euro bill and getting rid of the $100 bill and banning cash. Now, interestingly,
be hard to do that in Vegas.
Sweden, but also, how many people in Africa have a bank account? 3%. Same thing with a lot of these countries. You can't. It's impossible to do. But like I said, central banks are absolutely beyond desperate, so they're pulling out all the stops that they can do. Now, the interesting thing about Sweden is nearly, and they're going negative interest rates. They are nearly a cashless society to begin with. I was watching Max Kaiser doing an interview in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, right next door. And they wanted to go buy a cup of coffee from a vendor, and it only costs like €1, 1.25 euros, and the vendor wouldn't accept it. They don't accept cash. You had to use your card for everything.
That's crazy. Usually it's the other way around.
But it's even more hilarious. The Swiss, or the Swedish government, gave all of their homeless, their panhandlers, Visa machines, so that people, if they want to give to a beggar, they
they
swipe
it.
Yeah,
That's
800 of them
that's
they give out to the
nuts.
panhandlers. You think the world's going insane?
There is that technology, like even all you need is a phone or whatever. Even with a phone, you can do all that shit, like swipe a card and, you got PayPal and all of this stuff. But
let me tell you something. All of this has been building up, and it didn't. What we see with Trump and Sanders, what we see going on in Europe with the secession movements and the rise of right wing things, this is all finally the culmination of what happened shortly after 2008. Because I can show you exactly how things started rising, but there wasn't enough critical mass to get it to boost like it is now. What was the first big revolt following the 2008 bailouts?
Well, even with the election of Obama, was in a sense because
it was
people...
sort of that was more for the war. People were tired of the war. And it was a anti-Bush thing. That's really what Obama was, because it did the Democratic Party too. They were tired of Bush. But what was the first big revolt? It was Occupy Wall Street.
Oh yeah. Okay. That was even before Obama got elected.
Yeah, Occupy Wall Street was the first thing where people started saying enough is enough. You bailed out spare money.
But see, the whole thing is they're going the other way. I agree with them to an extent, because about what the banks are doing and the corporations and all of that shit. But what the problem, I agree with them on. What the issue is, I agree with them on. But their solution is more government and basically socialism.
Right. But see, and what their ideals were, I'm not worried about that. I'm talking about the frequency of people finally coming out, and it's being called angry white man syndrome. But it's just there was a frequency of something is wrong with the system, and people were starting to come out. So you had Occupy Wall Street first. What followed next? The creation and rise of the Tea Party. Okay, you had a bunch of conservatives who realized the Republicans were not conservative anymore, that political correctness and minorities and immigration and everything was going against, this rise of women's rights again. The single white conservative male, Christian male, was absolutely left out of the conversation. And so that was really the rise of the Tea Party. But what followed the Tea Party? Well,
sort of. The Tea Party, from what I understood, was more Ron Paul, and then it got hijacked and totally taken over.
Ron Paul came after. That was the third one. The Ron
Paul's been around way before,
right?
2008.
But the Ron Paul revolution did not really come into manifest until it was the third part of this movement. First was Occupy, then it was the Tea Party, then it was the Ron Paul revolution. And people remember 4 years ago when Ron Paul got left off of several ballots where the primaries just destroyed him. Okay, that was when people started realizing that the establishment was not going to let anybody in their playing field. And then 4 years later now, we have it exploding in critical mass. This whole thing stemming from the taxpayer bailouts, okay, and nobody on Wall Street getting jailed. The 7-8 years leading up to now has been a slow simmering, and now it's really coming to a boil. It doesn't matter the individuals who are a part of this. That's what people have to. It's not about Sanders. It's not about Trump. It's not about Ron Paul. It's not about the wackos and Occupy. It's not about the Tea Party. It's that people are trying somehow against this monstrous draconian establishment oligarchy. They're trying to rebel against it.
Right, but they're not really doing anything to rebel. They just
they are.
Not really, because
if you look at what Sanders has done by grabbing all the millennials, okay, who are under this burden of student loan debt, and living at 50% of them are living at home again, and they don't have a future. There's no real jobs. Okay. That's percolating over into Sanders. And then Donald Trump is getting all the conservatives who are despise the Republican neocons and want the end of war.
Right, but they're just getting duped by Trump.
What they are is the middle class that's been destroyed since the 2008 credit crisis.
But to me, they're all getting duped by more politicians because it's the same shit. They're thinking they're looking towards some different politician to fucking bail them out. So go ahead.
In a movement, things have to go in progression. And like I said, from Occupy to what now, it's culminating in that this election right here, okay, I believe is the last final straw. If whoever is elected, if the Republican Party does, steals the nomination from the two frontrunners and puts in one of their lackeys, the Republican Party is over. It's dead. Okay, if Hillary gets into office, she is such a psychopath, she will destroy what's left of the country. Okay, so if you have from Occupy to Tea Party to Ron Paul Revolution to the Sanders-Trump phenomenon, which is anti-establishment, if that does not come out to fruition over the next 4 years, one thing remains. And you know what that is? Civil war. There will be violent. Do you remember what JFK once said?
He said a lot of things.
JFK said, "Those who do not allow for peaceful revolution,
yeah, I know it. Go ahead,
will inevitably find themselves in violent revolution," and that's exactly what Occupy to Trump Sanders is today. This is the final straw of a peaceful revolution. If the people who are screaming out get cut off, think about this. The establishment is even making sure that Hillary does it. The Democratic Party has what's called superdelegates.
Yeah,
and
they can just
480, and there are 480 superdelegates that can pick and choose as they see fit.
Yeah, they can put in whoever they want.
Yeah, 26 have sided with Sanders. The other 460 are with her.
Right.
If those 460 were with Sanders, he would actually be ahead of her in delegates.
Lucky for them that most likely the way things are going that Hillary is going to win, because otherwise those super delegates would just even if Sanders got the one more states and got more regular delegates, they would just put a Hillary in.
Yeah, exactly.
And then same thing would make them look bad.
Like
but
I said, the establishment and the oligarchy they're fighting for their lives here, because if Sanders or Trump got in there, then all of this cronyism would be completely wiped out. It doesn't matter which one it is. Okay, the cronyism would be wiped out. All these senators and congressmen who have been getting rich off of lobbyists and all that, even before they get out of office, that would be done. A lot of this stuff.
I think that's untrue. I no matter. Maybe if Sanders got in there, I don't know, but if Trump gets in there,
how much is the establishment going
change.
Out of its way to ensure that Trump doesn't get in there? That right there, I don't care about Trump the man. You know what? He's got his past. He's a flip-flopper from what he did 20 years ago to what he is. But the point is that the establishment is doing so much.
Well, because they're nervous that
no, it's not nervous. They are desperate.
They believe, that whatever they believe. But I don't believe that him getting in there is going to make a difference at all.
Yeah,
I don't believe anybody getting in there, first of all. But he's gonna.
That's where we're not going to ever come to a consensus here.
On his platform, he's gonna do the same fucking shit. He's actually gonna do worse because he's gonna take away even more freedoms. Whoever's in there. But go ahead.
Yeah, okay, look. There's hype from everybody. There's hyperbole.
I'm listening to what the debates, his town halls, what he says he's gonna do in office. And what he's going to do in office is basically, I actually listened to this because I can't watch it while I'm working, but listened to a documentary on East Germany today. Basically, many of the things that fucking, Trump supports, some of them already exist anyway, but he wants more security. He made a statement about, the First Amendment. Who cares about freedom of speech? All of this shit. He wants a bigger military. He wants all of these things, a big wall to keep us in, really.
Look,
I mean,
I'm not going to deny what you're saying. That's exactly what he said in the thing. But you have to understand the whole crux of what this is about. Okay, Donald Trump.
I understand why people are voting for him, but it's.
You know why Donald Trump is using this hyperbole?
They're being duped, as far as I'm concerned.
You know why he's using this hyperbole? You know why he's going after somebody like Megyn Kelly and calling her names that no politician would ever say to a woman? You know why he's saying this? Okay, because he spent 8 to 10 years on a reality TV show. And in a reality TV show, you pay exorbitant attention to ratings and Nielsen ratings and what the public wants and doesn't want to keep your show on the air. During that time, Donald Trump was able to glean so much demographics of what people wanted and didn't want.
He also failed in a bunch of shit at the same time.
Yeah, but that's not here and there. We're talking about politics. He understands
in the show. He
understands the simmering, the frequency of what
right.
From occupied whatever.
He's
playing. He's using it.
He's playing it up. He also came out and said that they asked him about something. I don't remember what it was, and he said, "Well, they may be discriminating against me because I'm a Christian and I'm a big Christian." And he plays it to whoever his audience is.
Remember Obama said he was going to be the most transparent.
Yeah,
president.
Exactly.
Remember how Obama said he was a Christian? He's really a
exactly.
Muslim.
They're politicians, and
exactly.
he's just like the other politicians.
You can't look at the hyperbole of winning the race. That's the key thing. Look at who attacks you. You know, they say that the truth of a man is by who your enemies are, and if the establishment is willing to absolutely steal the thing, if Mitt Romney comes out of the woodwork to do a vilification, if Marco Rubio suddenly changes course and tries to be a killer against Trump when that's not his nature, and you can see how it affected him, when all these things are attacking Trump and Cruz as such vilification by the establishment, it doesn't matter what they're going to do in office. Aren't we, you and I, and those in the alternative here, isn't our goal to see the oligarchy, the establishment, be crushed and break apart, even if it's to a detriment? Look, Iceland went through an exorbitant. They went through 18 months of depression when they jailed the bankers, defaulted on their debt, and whatever. To come out ahead after something's been built up, when you have, it's like they say, if you have a cut and it's with a dull blade, then that cut is going to sit there for weeks and months and never heal properly. But if you have a quick clean cut, okay, it heals fairly quickly. You have to destroy it utterly and then go through the pain of that wound before you can actually have the healing commence. We can't have little things like, well, maybe this politician is going to do it. It had nothing to do with the politicians. Like I said, this is a last-ditch effort. Whoever wins, however it comes out, if whoever comes into office and the Congress and the Supreme Court and and Wall Street, if they don't change their ways, which, in my opinion, they're not going to.
They're not.
The people
No.
they have. The next 4 years is going to see civil war.
I don't know. I'd rather see a fucking civil war personally than just another politician in there
we have been
doing the same shit. So,
yeah, it's going to be fascinating.
I'd rather see that, but I don't think that's going to happen. People,
look at Ferguson.
People
look
don't
at Baltimore.
seem to do shit.
Look at what they did. Trying to with Move On and Soros paying for Move On to disrupt Trump's town hall meetings. Look at all that's going on. Look what happened to the
those are different though, because those are politically funded movements. Those are where you have somebody behind them. That's not most of these big movements all get hijacked by politics.
But the problem is, like I said, we have had 40 years of white guilt and nobody willing to step up because they'd be fear of calling a racist. At a certain point, the old saying is let sleeping giants lie. There's, the amount of racism that's really in the United States is extremely minimal. But the problem is that those who make their money on division can't afford for the racism thing to go away. So they've doubled down and they've made it exorbitant. And they keep piling these lies into people. It's like I watched CNBC the other day, and they had 4 women on who were CEOs of corporations. They brought them on to talk about income disparity.
Yeah, that bullshit.
And you're a CEO of a company as a woman, and you're sitting there telling,
right.
I'm making it.
Yeah, I know. It's all part of
Thomas Sowell, in the 1970s, there's an old clip of him. He said, I've looked at all the numbers. He said the reason that women don't make the same as men is because normally women don't have the longevity that men in the same position.
Yeah, there's a lot of other reasons why, but that's we're out of time. Thanks again, as always, for joining us, and Ken will be back in a couple weeks.
Yep.
As he joins us every other week. So we will see him then, and I'm sure there'll be a lot to talk about between now and then. So thanks, everybody, for joining us, and I will be back tomorrow.
The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to take the law, we enforce it. But at the end of the day, each and every man gets to go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer.
Unless I get attacked.
What you can also do is, if it continues to be a hassle, you can get some GoPro cameras, put them in the thing, and then they activate on motion. And so if the HOA or whoever comes after you with a letter, you can just say, here's a film. Either you're going to tell me who this is, you're going to reprimand them to keep quiet, or you're going to get a lawsuit. My lawyer will speak to you.
Right.
That's usually the best way to do it. You can scare HOAs because, HOAs are like politicians. The nerd who wanted to be class president,
right.
He gets a little power as the HOA president, and he takes it out on everybody.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is just that these people are, fucking cowards, and they're sitting there
collecting their welfare, nothing else to do. They
must be. So, I don't even think it violates the HOA rules, actually. They just, they're trying to make threats because they mentioned the ASPCA. But what the ASPCA made me think of is the scenarios where you have people doing this. They're calling child protective services on people because their 8-year-old is outside at 6 o'clock by themselves or something, and they feel that that's not appropriate. So it's kind of in the same vein, and that's why I brought it up, because to me it goes beyond that. This is not just like a little HOA violation where you have the people that are checking for it. This is somebody who's like, you're abusing your animals in our opinion, and they don't know fucking anything. They can't tell that, they claim it's 100 degrees, it's 75 degrees out, and there was also a roof over it, so the cat was fine, and the cat had plenty of food and water. I don't want to sit and harp on this, but yeah, so it's all, to me, I put it in that same category with those fucking people that call the Child Protective Services and call the police on people for letting their kids go outside and play. So it's getting ridiculous. But since we haven't had you on in a while, since I haven't been on, what I wanted to do first, and there's a lot of stuff, current stuff to talk about, but just in summary, what's anything that's been going on in the past, 3-4 weeks?
Well, the start of the year, obviously, we had the stock markets just go absolutely insane. We entered a bear market, 20% down. We actually had the last 2 days of December, trading days of December, the first 7 days of January, and then 17 out of the first 19 days of January were all negative in pretty much all the markets. And then it declined from its highs, it declined more than 20%. So that's considered a bear market. Since then, there's been a lot of interventions by Bank of Japan, by the ESF, the Europe, of course, and they brought the markets back about 8%. So the dead cat bounced. But interestingly enough, the analysts who usually cheerlead and say everything's fine, like JP Morgan, Bank of America, and a few others, they've actually been telling their clients to sell into these rallies. They don't believe that these recent rallies are what they seem. So they're selling into it. And a new report came out earlier this week that nearly all of the recovery, the 8% recovery from the January swoon, has been corporations buying back their own stocks at cheap prices.
And that's what they've been doing like for years now, right? For the past 5 years.
Yeah, they've been doing it. And what's gotten them in trouble, of course, is that they've been borrowing money to buy back their stock. See,
first reading it on their website. But anyway, we see all this increase in getting citizens. Oh, I hate the word citizens. So getting people, because I never asked to be a citizen. I was just born in a geographical area. And then, hey, you're a citizen of the United States. And I know most people would say, oh, you should be so happy that you are and all of this shit and whatever. It's the greatest country in the world. And I don't know about that. There are a lot of countries I'm glad I was not born in. And I'm not saying that I'm not grateful for the things I have. But there are a lot of other countries that do have a high standard of living. And the United States is not necessarily the greatest country in the world. It's definitely heading towards one of the most oppressive. And one of the things they're doing is, of course, spying more on people, whether it's via phone, computer, whatever, your neighbors. And the funny thing is they put on these commercials as well, even at the movies, see something, say something. And the way they actually put them together, it was like, this is our community. If we see anything, bad, like the way they structure it is just insane. Anyway, so yesterday, my fiance found on her car a note. It looked like it was written by a fucking third grader or somebody retarded. If you had seen I should actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a fucking picture of it and put it on Facebook. So I'm going to put it on the Nonpartisan Liberty for All Facebook page. And so you can see the fucking writing. But we keep the dog outside when we're not home during the day. The past couple weeks, it's been hot, but it hasn't been hot enough where we actually started putting the cat outside too we have a second floor where there's no way the cat can jump off it. And it's not open. I mean, it's open, but it has a top over it. So basically the cat is, yes, if it was actually 100 degrees, which they tried to claim in their note, then that's a little different. But what they did was they made a threat and said, we left our pets out without food or water in 100-degree weather, and that they threatened to call the ASPCA and the Homeowners Association. And first of all, there was food and water out there. And how the fuck do they know when we feed the animals anyway? Because you don't have to leave food out all fucking day. If you feed like the dog, we'll feed twice a day. So if we're going to feed them in the morning and then after work, we're not going to leave food out so the dog can just fucking eat all day. Water, yes. And there's always been water. Now, they sometimes dump it over. How they would know that, they would either have to be staring at our fucking house and really watching it closely and looking closely at it, at least for the cat in the front that's on the second floor there. Now, the dog was in the back. The only way to see anything, unless you jump over the walls are pretty high, so you'd have to be pretty tall, and you still couldn't tell if there was water in this bowl. Sometimes I'm 2 feet away from it and I can't tell. I have to actually like shake it. I'm like, okay, to make sure there's water. But they were in our fucking yard before, which is trespassing. If I would have found them, I would have pulled out a fucking gun and told them to get the fuck out. So you have people even coming in because you have to open a gate. It's a locked, it's not locked, but it might as well be. It's hard to open it. You have to open up the gate and then go into this back area that is totally walled off. So my point being is, I think about having kids, and this is a type of thing that happens to people, and they get their kids taken away because you have neighbors that are watching everything you do because they have no fucking life, or they feel that it's their responsibility to save the world or some shit. And they don't even know what the real story is. And they didn't put their name on it neither, because I would have went right to their fucking house and said something to them. But they wrote an anonymous letter and retarded fucking, I don't know what it is. It's English, but it's like retarded fucking printed blocks and shit like that. So you have people making assumptions and then making threats and not even saying who the fuck they are. So I was going to go door to door. I think I know who it is. I think it's got to be the people right next door. But to be sitting there watching what people are doing and thinking that, oh, you're helping, or, if you're concerned, maybe come to the door and come talk to me and ask and say, well, it looked like they didn't have any water. We're concerned about your pets. Now, that's none of your fucking business neither. Okay? Our animals are fine. They're taken care of. It's not like the animals look like they're unhappy or malnourished or whatever. I know my cat will meow just because it sees people and it wants to be around people. That's the type of cat I have. So maybe the cat was meowing or something like that. The dog is just friendly and will run up to people and want them to pet her. But this whole bullshit that you're sitting there watching my backyard and watching my fucking house and then making these anonymous threats is fucked up. And you can just look at that and see how it would apply to something else, whether it's your kids or, and that's what happens all the time too. You get, the ASPCA can't do shit. So I'm nervous about leaving the animals outside because if they kidnap my animals, and, of course, the government does whatever the fuck they want, so they'll probably just defend them. But as far as if I'm home, I'll put them outside if I fucking want to, because as long as it's not, too hot and I know they're taken care of and they have water and they're fed and, it's none of their fucking business. So it's just another one of those things where, okay, well, I just have pets and I'm being threatened by people who don't know shit about what's going on. What about when I have kids? What if the kids are playing outside and they feel that, oh, they're too young to be outside by themselves? And this has happened already where kids have been arrested, parents have been arrested. And unfortunately, I rent my house, but it's about 5 feet away from the next house. They are really close. But still, I wouldn't even know if somebody had a fucking cat on their balcony, because I'm not paying attention to what other people are doing. I'm only paying attention in a sense of not that I'm paranoid, but, I'm always aware of my environment. And if somebody were, especially with my show, were to do something or something like that. So I'm aware of people if they get too close to me. That's about it. As far as houses that are right next to me or across the street,
we will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to pick the law, we enforce it. But at the end of the day, each and every member should go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. I'm your host, Dave Bourne, and it is March 16th, 2016, and I'm coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada. Thank you for tuning in to Nonpartisan Liberty for All. We are on weeknights, Tuesday through Thursday, 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern, and you can listen live on Spreaker.com as well as nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. And to the archives on Spreaker, YouTube, Twitter, SoundCloud, and a few other applications that you can get from nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. And those are posted immediately after the live show airs. Here on Nonpartisan Liberty for All, we promote the ideas of true freedom and liberty, meaning being able to do whatever you want as long as you respect the freedom of others and don't directly interfere with their freedom, as well as exposing government for what it is, a mafia based on extortion that rules without consent by threat of force and violence. Today is our week that we have historian and our expert on the economy and geopolitics, Ken Schortgen of the Daily Economist. Definitely go check out his site. There are a number of articles that we're going to talk about today that I suggest you check out. We're going to get to Ken in a few minutes, but before we do that, yesterday I had talked about an article regarding the FBI and declassified documents. And it's funny because today we'll also be talking about some other declassified documents that Ken has written about relating to the financial crisis. But within the documents I talked about yesterday had to do with now, I think they were from originally 2014, but they had just released them, and they had to do with schools now being instructed by the FBI to spy on kids, which pretty much Common Core is part of that, but more specifically to spy on kids that are quote unquote anti-government, sovereign citizens. Essentially, if you're considered anti-government or you speak out against the government or anything like that, they would call you a sovereign citizen, which, as I mentioned yesterday, is an oxymoron, because to be sovereign is to be free, essentially, and your own free sovereign person. Yeah, I know you're not supposed to use the definition of the word, or you're not supposed to use the word in the definition, but in a citizen, by definition, is you're a citizen of a nation, meaning you're a subject or a part of a nation under a government. So it doesn't make sense anyway. I believe the FBI had essentially made that term up. I remember, I don't really give a fuck what they're doing as long as they're not doing anything to threaten me, but I'm not paying attention to their kids or their fucking animals. But this is the type of thinking that is a serious issue where people can't mind their fucking business and they want to be involved and everybody else is, and they feel that they have a right to somehow be involved in your life. And I don't want these fucking people involved in my life. That's why I want to move to the fucking desert. Unfortunately, my fiance doesn't want to move there, and have a house that is like a mile away from fucking the next house. I'm not even kidding. I'm totally serious, because this shit is just gonna get crazier and crazier. And of course, we got helicopters flying over the house at least once a day. I'm not saying they're flying over my house that it has anything to do with me. They're just patrolling the neighborhood. It's police helicopters or some kind of fucking agency. So I got a lot to talk about with Ken, so I don't want to keep him on hold anymore. If you'd like to call in, the number is 702. I forgot the fucking number again because I haven't done the show in a while. So let me just get that. While I'm getting that number, you can always Skype in at Nonpartisan Liberty for All. Just send a contact request and let us know what you want to talk about and where you're calling from. Or you can call via phone at 702-470-7664. I never call that number, and I forgot it last night too, but 702-470-7664. So now that we got through all of that, I'd like to welcome Ken back to the show. Obviously, he hasn't been on for a while because I haven't been on for a while. So, Ken, thanks as always for joining us.
Pleasure to be here, Dave. And hopefully your pet zoo fiasco will work itself out.
Yeah, do you believe that shit? And they don't even have the fucking balls to actually write their name or their number of their house. They're just anonymously, we're going to call the ASPCA. But
over here in Arizona, just about every house is now in a HOA, and
it's like that here too.
What ends up happening is that the people who report in a given housing area, they don't actually live there. What usually happens is you got like an elderly couple, or who just spend all day getting upset because you have one weed growing when it's spring. And what they'll do is they'll tell their friends who live in another housing area right nearby to drive by and make an anonymous call. So nobody can go chase them down in the actual people down.
Yeah, that I think happened in another instance where we put because one of the dog could fit through the gate, so we bought like a baby gate, and somebody reported that. Those people, I think, did that, but these people I know because they were even saying, you're annoying your neighbors, and from the way the letter read, I'm pretty sure that it's the people next door. I could be wrong, but it sounded like the way the letter was written, that it was written from somebody that was right there, and that they had to be watching for a while. So I know what you're saying, and I think that did happen before, where they actually have, not even that, but they have people that walk around that the HOA hires just to fucking look at shit. But this was something that was ongoing because before we had, like I mentioned, my fiance caught people in the fucking yard, and you got to open the gate. And I find people in my yard, they're going to get a fucking gun pulled on them. I'm not going to shoot anybody